In the early hours of September 8, 1860, the steamer Lady Elgin was sinking fast. Hundreds of passengers, many of them from Milwaukee, were now fighting for their lives in the stormy waters of Lake Michigan. Some clung to fragments of the wreckage, while others were swept away by the waves. By morning, the scale of the disaster would become clear. This was one of the deadliest maritime tragedies in Great Lakes history. The Lady Elgin had already survived multiple close calls, but this time, there would be no rescue. What went so horribly wrong that night, and how did a seemingly routine voyage turn into an unprecedented catastrophe? In this video, we'll answer those questions and more, as we dive into the life and tragic sinking of the Lady Elgin. Welcome to Shipwreck History. By the mid-19th century, Chicago was rapidly evolving from a modest frontier settlement into one of the most important cities in America. Its population had exploded from just a few thousand in the 1830s to over 100,000 by the 1860s. This wasn't just random growth. Chicago sat at a crossroads of industry, agriculture, and transportation. The Illinois and Michigan Canal had recently connected the Great Lakes to the Mississippi River, opening the floodgates for trade. Grain from the Midwest, timber from the North, and manufactured goods from the East all passed through the city, making it a key player in the nation's economy. At the heart of this booming industry was Lake Michigan. Before railroads fully connected the region, the Great Lakes served as the highways of the Midwest. Passenger steamers, freight carriers, and even small private vessels crisscrossed the waters, linking Chicago with Milwaukee, Detroit, and other cities along the shore. These steamers weren't just transportation, they were a way of life. They carried politicians on campaign tours, connected immigrants to new opportunities, and allowed businessmen to travel quickly between growing commercial centers. The Lady Elgin was one of these vital steamers. Built for speed and luxury, it carried thousands of passengers throughout its years of service, offering comfortable travel complete with live music and fine dining. But despite its popularity, the ship had already gained a troubling reputation. In an era where maritime safety regulations were lax, steamers like the Lady Elgin faced constant risks: harsh storms, collisions, and overcrowding. Each trip across Lake Michigan was a gamble, and for Lady Elgin, that gamble would eventually end in catastrophe. The Lady Elgin was built in 1851 in Buffalo, New York, by shipbuilder George Hardin. Designed as a wooden-hulled sidewheel steamer, it was built for both speed and capacity. With a powerful walking beam engine and twin paddle wheels, the Lady Elgin could travel at impressive speeds for its time, making it one of the more prominent steamers operating on the Great Lakes. The ship was intended for a mix of passenger travel, political excursions, and cargo transport. It was particularly well known for its ability to accommodate large groups, making it a favorite for political delegations and social gatherings. At a time when Chicago and Milwaukee were becoming key economic hubs, steamers like Lady Elgin provided crucial links between cities, carrying everything from goods and supplies to prominent figures. The Lady Elgin was no stranger to disaster. Throughout its years of service, the steamer had multiple close calls, enough to make some believe the ship was cursed. From mechanical failures to groundings, and even a previous sinking, its history was filled with near tragedies that foreshadowed what was to come. One of the most serious incidents occurred in 1854 when the Lady Elgin struck a rock near Manitowoc, Wisconsin. The damage was severe, and the ship sank in shallow water. Fortunately, due to its close proximity to shore, salvage efforts were successful. The vessel was raised, repaired, and returned to service, but the incident left a mark on its reputation. In 1857, the steamer suffered a major mechanical failure when its paddle wheel shaft broke mid-voyage, stranding passengers until another vessel could help get the ship back to safety. Mechanical issues plagued the Lady Elgin throughout its career, a sign of the wear and tear that came with operating on the often violent waters of the Great Lakes. Collisions were also a recurring danger. On multiple occasions, Lady Elgin narrowly avoided catastrophe in the congested shipping lanes between Chicago and Milwaukee. The ship's reliance on visual navigation in an era before modern maritime safety laws made nighttime travel especially hazardous. These repeated incidents reinforced just how unpredictable Great Lakes travel could be, and how even the most seasoned vessels were at constant risk. Despite these setbacks, Lady Elgin remained a trusted and widely used steamer. But its history of accidents, salvages, and repairs created an ominous pattern, one that culminated in disaster on its final voyage. On the evening of September 7, 1860, the Lady Elgin embarked on what was supposed to be a routine journey from Chicago back to Milwaukee. The steamer carried nearly 400 passengers, many of them supporters of Wisconsin's Democratic Party, who had traveled to Chicago for a political rally. Spirits were high as the ship made its way north across Lake Michigan, its passengers enjoying music, dancing, and the gentle rhythm of the waves. But by the early hours of September 8th, everything would change. Around 2:30 a.m., in the pitch-black darkness of a stormy night, the Lady Elgin was suddenly struck by the schooner Augusta, a much smaller vessel hauling lumber. The collision was catastrophic. Augusta's bow tore a massive hole into the Lady Elgin's side just below the waterline. Within minutes, water surged through the gash, flooding the ship's lower compartments. The Augusta's crew was aware they had struck something but assumed their ship was in greater danger. They checked for damage and, upon seeing their vessel was still seaworthy, continued to Chicago without knowing the full extent of Lady Elgin's situation. At first, the crew fought desperately to save the ship. Cargo, and even cattle, were thrown overboard to lighten the load, but it was no use. The steamer was mortally wounded, and just 20 minutes after the collision, Lady Elgin broke apart. In the midst of the disaster, a critical complication arose. Its anchor chain snagged on a submerged rock. This unexpected obstruction caused part of the wreckage to remain briefly tethered in place, preventing sections of the ship from drifting freely with the waves. The entanglement added to the chaos, making it even harder for passengers to escape as the storm continued to batter the remains of the ship. Eventually, the relentless force of the water wrenched the wreckage loose, sending more fragments into the lake. Some passengers clung to debris, while others were swept away by the churning lake. The storm, which had already made visibility difficult, now turned the rescue efforts into a nightmare. As the Lady Elgin took on water, Captain Jack Wilson remained on the rapidly sinking vessel, doing everything in his power to save his passengers. He is said to have worked tirelessly to calm the panicked crowd, directing them toward any available debris that could serve as flotation. Even as the ship broke apart, Wilson continued his efforts, reportedly assisting passengers onto lifeboats and wreckage, before finally being swept into the water himself. He clung to debris for hours but ultimately succumbed to exhaustion and drowned, a final act of dedication to the people he had sworn to protect. For hours, survivors fought against the relentless waves. Some managed to cling to sections of the wreckage, but exhaustion, hypothermia, and the unforgiving waters took a heavy toll. Only a small number of those on board would make it to shore alive. One of the most well-known rescues came from Northwestern University students in Evanston, who braved the raging surf to pull survivors from the water. Their efforts saved several lives, but by morning, the true scale of the disaster became clear. Over 300 people had been lost, making it one of the deadliest maritime tragedies in Great Lakes history. Chicago was devastated by the news. The tragedy struck particularly hard within the city's Irish immigrant community, as many victims were members of the Union Guards, a militia with strong political and social ties. The loss of so many prominent figures deepened the sense of mourning, and mass funerals were held in the days that followed. The schooner Augusta continued its journey to Chicago without stopping to assist in rescue efforts. This became a major point of controversy, as many believed the crew should have done more to help. Despite widespread outrage, legal action against Augusta's captain, Darius Millot, resulted in little consequence. Courts ultimately ruled the disaster an accident. While no immediate maritime laws changed, the Lady Elgin disaster fueled discussions about passenger safety, vessel inspections, and navigation protocols. Over time, it became one of the many tragedies that influenced stricter regulations on overcrowding and emergency preparedness at sea. For over a century, the remains of Lady Elgin lay undiscovered beneath the waves of Lake Michigan. It wasn't until 1989 that the main wreck site was definitively located, resting in about 60 feet of water near Highwood, Illinois. The wreckage is fragmented, with sections buried under sand and silt, making exploration difficult. Despite its condition, artifacts and remnants of the ship have been recovered over the years. Diving on the wreck has been a subject of legal debate. After its discovery, a lengthy battle ensued over ownership and preservation rights. Today, the wreck is protected under both Illinois state law and the Federal Abandoned Shipwreck Act, which restrict unauthorized removal of artifacts. Some recovered items have been placed in museums, preserving the ship's history for future generations. The Lady Elgin disaster remains one of the deadliest maritime tragedies in Great Lakes history. At a time when steamships were essential for travel and commerce, its loss underscored the dangers of overcrowding, severe weather, and limited life-saving measures. More than 150 years later, the stormy night of September 8, 1860, still stands as a defining moment in Great Lakes history, one that echoes through time just beneath the waves. If you enjoyed this video, hit like and share, or leave us a thanks. Don't forget to follow our channel for all things shipwrecks, and let us know in the comments what shipwrecks you want us to cover next. Until next time, keep exploring.